The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Saskatchewan Pulse Growers, DuPont Verticin Fungicide, and Nodulator XL.
We've been growing the crop for about 30-40 years, so we've accumulated the diseases that affect things here. So we deal with ascochyta and anthracnose. Now we're dealing with Stymphalium blight. That's something that shows up over time. We've kind of more or less got ascochyta under control through breeding, and we're getting there for anthracnose. But as soon as you make space available on the plant, in comes another disease, and we think Stymphalium is the next one in line to cause some trouble. And in really wet and cool years, we get things like botrytis and sclerotinia, which are more like a weather-related problem. Stymphalium likes humid conditions, hot and humid. Sound familiar this summer? And that's kind of, we have a student from Bangladesh who's just finishing up, and he was able to take the same experiments, plant them in Bangladesh in the winter, and then plant them here last summer, because its conditions aren't that different. Their winters like our summers, especially as they get humid. So yeah, those are yield limitation situations. We're also very interested, of course, in if you were to make a list with ask farmers what their biggest problem is in lentils, I think historically I said weeds, disease would be number 2. So we have actually put some effort into trying to find expand the range of herbicides that we can put on lentil, and we're not doing it. We're just sort of doing a sped up old-fashioned way. We're finding it within lentil, the lentil germplasm. We've got our own techniques for figuring out what might have tolerance. So we've got some new herbicide tolerances on the way.
And how difficult is it to incorporate some of these?
Well, as life gets more complex, you need to develop better tools, and so we manage it right now through traditional breeding, but we're just this year entering the stage of using some molecular markers, and that's kind of where we think we're going to be able to go to. It's kind of like you're a juggler. It's pretty easy with 3 balls, right? But now we're getting to 6 and 7 balls. We need a better tool. Like, you either got to throw the balls higher, or you need more hands. So we're dealing with that. That's well on the way, though. We're confident we're going to be able to design our crossing in such a way that we'll be able to manage more traits at the same time.
You'd mentioned expanded herbicide tolerances. Like,
yeah.
What kind of chemistries do you think of?
We think that we've had group 2 resistance, and we think maybe group 14, that'll be on the tour here today. We'll show people what we have there, and possibly group 5 herbicides as well, which would be metribuzin.
So is it difficult to manage? Obviously we have diseases and we have weeds, but obviously yield is also important. So how does that play into?
Well, if you solve the weed problem and the disease problem, you're at least maintaining your yield, right? Your yield potential. You got to think about what's your absolute yield and what's your potential to achieve the yield that you could get, right? And those things are intertwined. But basically, by removing constraints, we guarantee more consistent yield. At yield per se, we do that through introducing new genetic backgrounds into the program, and then screen it for yield as best we can. And how to screen for yield? In the case of the lentil, we have a lot of genetic diversity to work with, and that's kind of our measuring stick. We're finding that we're able to maintain yield gains in lentil over the last 20 years of about 2% a year. And we'd like to certainly keep that going for another 10 years. Some crops on a global scale are getting tapped out. Once you have 12 tons of wheat per hectare, what's your next trick? You're kind of approaching the limit.
And what do you think? Obviously, I'm not going to hold you to a hard number, but what is the yield potential for lentils?
Well, the highest commercial yields we've seen, and this is documented more than once through. We know a lot of seed growers, and I get these calls every year where someone has achieved 60 plus bushels in the last 3 or 4 years. That's usually a combination of great weather, good agronomy, good weed control, good disease control, and just like things work out. And it'd be like a 200-acre field that gets weighed up at a plant, and the plant manager will call me and say, like, this is unbelievable. So yeah, we think 60 to 65. There will be some this year. That's not the same as cereals, but on the other hand, it's a lot more protein. So if you're producing protein, your yield can't be as high, right? Like carbohydrates, easy to get yield. That's what we see worldwide. But if you're starting to produce, you know, oil and protein, the biological cost is a little higher, so your yield can't be as great. But I'd be pretty happy with 60 bushel lentils if I could do it consistently.
Is there any advantage or opportunity to increase the height of the plant?
You know, basically how you would have to do that is to increase the internode length, and then you might start getting into lodging issues. So typically when we've had really tall lentils that are 2 feet high, there's nothing there. They're just forage. So I'm not sure. I don't think we're limited by the harvesting technology. I mean, everybody says that, but I've had one grower say to me, in fact the guy who just called me, he was a first-time lentil grower. He grew 3,000 acres, and he produced about 45 bushels to the acre, just up the road here on Highway 41. And the same year he was growing canola all through the area, and he said he actually got slightly higher yield on lentils than canola. He says, but the thing that bothered him was that it took 6 feet of canola stalk to produce the same yield. He said, and I couldn't believe how much was coming off the lentils. They're all sort of packed into the top 18 inches above the ground. So you can't just talk about height. You got to talk about density of the canopy and so on. That leads to its own issues in terms of harvestability. But the guys that have the right equipment don't really complain about harvesting lentils anymore. Most of the new varieties stand up. The older ones were all laying flat by the time they had any yield, but nowadays they're pretty stiff.